As soon as you start, set up a system. This is where I'm going to save my documents. If you're going digital, set up a system how you're going to save it. I always say, whenever saving a document, it's always when, what, who. So for receipts, it's when did it happen, the vendor, and the amount. But any sort of document, if you set up a system, it's going to be much easier going forward.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Side Hustle Hero, the podcast that inspires action and helps you to grow your side hustle into a thriving income stream. I'm your host, Joan Posivy. Whether you're just starting out or you've been avoiding that growing pile of receipts, it's time to take control. In this episode, we're sharing 5 pro bookkeeping tips to help you stay organized, avoid costly mistakes, and keep your business on track. Tanya Akimenko started bookkeeping as a side hustle and grew it into a small business tax, accounting, and bookkeeping service agency with 15 employees. Now here to help us bring order to our bookkeeping world is the founder of Golden Apple Agency, Tanya Akimenko. Welcome, Tanya.
Thanks for having me.
When someone is preparing to launch their side hustle, their focus is on creating great products or services and figuring out how to reach their ideal customers. Once they launch, sales naturally become the top priority. With limited time and so much to juggle, why should they spend any of it on bookkeeping? Why not just toss, everything into a shoebox and deal with it later?
That's a great question. And you are so right. Most people, when they start their side hustle, they are so focused on bringing money in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a huge priority, of course. But you don't know if it's actually bringing you money, because if you're not tracking your expenses, you don't know if you're actually profitable or you're just putting more and more energy into it and not really truly bringing any money in.
Okay. Someone I met and sat down and talked to, she falls under that category. She hadn't been doing the books for about a year. And we're talking like high 6-figure, low 7-figure sales. And just from when I was talking to her and firing questions at her, I got the impression that she didn't really know where she was at. And it wouldn't surprise me if she was actually running maybe break even, but possibly a loss.
Yeah. And you won't know that until you have your bookkeeping done.
Yeah, because the money's coming in. So you're thinking, oh, this is great. But
Yeah.
how much are you really keeping at the end of the day in your pocket? So what are some essential bookkeeping habits we should develop from day one? Again, when time is so limited for us.
I like that you said habits, because habits are so important. It really is going to take creating that habit. But the first thing you need to understand is you need to understand yourself. If you're a morning person and you get those things done quickly in the morning, then do it in the morning. But if you're a night owl, do not try to do your bookkeeping in the morning. It's just not going to work. You're going to hate it. You're going to hate your day. It's going to be the worst.
And you're going to hate yourself and not recommend Tanya.
To start a habit, put it on your calendar, set a reminder on your phone. Actually show up. Even if in the beginning you can only stand 2 minutes of bookkeeping, show up. It will eventually get better and better.
And what is the recommended time frame? Are you thinking like once a week or once a month, or?
It depends on the volume that you have going on, but I would say recommended is once a week for sure. To sit down and just review the previous week. And if you're doing it weekly, then you really don't need more than 30 minutes. If you're doing it daily, it would be like 10 minutes. But again, this is really depending on the people, on yourself. So know yourself. What can you handle? I don't recommend waiting a whole month. Some people do. They're like, oh, I'll wait till my bank statement comes in, because you're not going to remember what you did 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Unless you've got a really strong paper trail in terms of you're tracking it properly and everything's documented.
But if you're focusing on so much sales and accounting is on the back burner, you're probably not tracking it or have a paper trail.
Right.
Paper trails are important though.
Okay. So for someone starting out, what would you suggest that they recommend that they start out with as far as like actual tools to track all this?
Yeah. So if you're starting out, there are of course lots of amazing accounting programs. But if you're starting out, those can get expensive fast. I would recommend starting with a spreadsheet, literally just even a Google Drive, or if you have Microsoft Excel, and literally just list the date, the vendor, where you spent the money, and the amount. If it's a direct cost, so if it's a product specific expense, then put it together with the product so you'll know, or the service, so you'll know if you're profitable in that particular product or service. But like your overhead expenses, so like your cell phone, your office rent, or things like that, then just do a general one. Just do a spreadsheet. Start out easy. You don't need the fancy accounting software when you're not making much money.
Right. I came across that. So for years, I was using a particular software program that I had bought. This was in the days before the subscription model really took hold. But eventually it became too outdated, and my accountant wanted me to upgrade to something else. And I was looking at all these plans and I'm thinking, I don't need to be spending this money every month. This is just a waste of money. I wanted to buy an upgraded version of that same software, which really wasn't available, or it was like super, super expensive. It was crazy. And I actually found a free one to start with. After the interview, I found the free accounting software listed, along with others, on the Business Development Bank of Canada website. I'll drop the link in the show notes. The software, called Wave, has worked well for one of my simpler businesses, and I've been using the free version for over 2 years. But for more complex businesses, a paid solution may be necessary. While Wave once was available globally, it now appears to be limited to North America. I guess my message is to shop around. You don't need to spend a lot of money in the beginning. Unless you've got a product or service where there is quite a bit of volume. Would you agree with that?
I would say yes. And also, if you're shopping around, like you said, maybe you don't need something, maybe you don't need so many options. But also, I find that some of the accounting software is not very user friendly.
Oh, okay.
And so you have to be careful with that.
Yeah.
Because I have seen customers come in, they use their things and things like that. But then they're like, "Oh, I don't understand why this is showing up like this or this." And so it's almost like a negative thing for you because you're tracking your expenses per se, but then it's not showing up correctly. So be careful with that. And if you are signing up for any software, it does not matter, free or paid or whatever, make sure you go through their training, their software training.
Oh, good idea. So you're doing the input correctly for accuracy. So now that we're set up with something that suits our needs, that is simple or as complex as that we need, what are some top 5 or top 3 best practices or pro tips you can share with us?
Set up a system. As soon as you start, set up a system. This is where I'm going to save my documents. If you're going digital, set up a system how you're going to save it. I always say, whenever saving a document, it's always when, what, who. So for receipts, it's when did it happen, the vendor, and the amount. I put the amount. But any sort of document, if you set up a system, it's going to be much easier going forward.
Okay. So for example, I fill up the car with gas today. What should I do with that? Number 1, I get a receipt. Number 2, then what should I do with it?
So it depends again what you know yourself.
Mhm.
Are you going to put it in the folder and have a nice filing system, paper filing system that you'll scan once a month? Or everyone has a cell phone, take a picture of it, create folders in your phone. Everybody has that option. Make it simple for yourself. This is my number 1 tip. Make it as simple as possible.
So then at the end of the week, say, what do I do with all those pictures of the receipts that I've uploaded on my phone?
Depends what phone you have. Like I have an Apple iPhone.
Okay.
So it gets synced with my cloud. And then once a week, once a month, whatever, you can just drag it to a Google Drive. I do recommend Google Drives because those are there forever. Set up a separate email with Gmail, and then that will be your receipt management kind of thing.
Oh, set up a Gmail account that's you're going to use specifically for your bookkeeping.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
specifically to keep track of all the receipts. That way, if you get an email receipt, you just forward it to that email and it's all in one place.
Oh, that's a
But
great
again,
tip.
it might work for someone, but it might not work for the other one. So you really need to know make it simple for yourself. What will you follow?
Okay. So again, using our gas receipt, when I'm using my phone, am I uploading it to a certain software program that tracks receipts, or am I just taking a photo and it's going to show up in a JPEG?
Yeah, if you have the software, if you're purchasing an accounting software and they have an app, most of them have the receipt capture.
Okay.
But if you're not using a software and you're using a spreadsheet, just save it to your phone and then upload it to Gmail. I think if you have the Gmail, the Google Drive on your phone, you can take it directly inside of the Google Drive, depending on your phone.
Okay. Yes. So now Google Drive, it's still going to show up as a JPEG. So that the end of the week or end of the month, I'm manually inputting them then into a spreadsheet.
Yes, if you have the spreadsheet, then yeah,
Okay. Otherwise, if I'm using a paid program, I can upload it through the app and it's all done for me.
correct.
All right. So tip number one is to start that system. What's
Yeah.
next on our list as far as a pro tip?
The first one should be simplify.
Oh, okay.
Make it simple. Everything, whatever you can do to simplify with all the processes.
Mhm.
Number two is start building habits. So put it on the calendar, like specific day of the week, specific time. Even if you show up just for a few minutes,
Right.
still show up. You're building a habit. Once it becomes a habit, it's much easier to do things. And then the tip number three is start a process folder. What are you doing? What are your processes? Write it down and come back to it.
What would that look like? I'm not quite sure I understand.
So, for example, your process would be like, I save receipts in this email. I label them when, what, amount, things like that. This is where to find it. This is how I name things. This is my folder categories, or this is my paper filing system.
Ah, so it describes the system that you're going to be
Yeah,
using to track all this.
correct.
Okay. Got it. Anything else to add to our list?
I would also say don't be so scared of it because a lot of times if you're not if you're not a numbers person, numbers usually scare you and you're like, I don't want to do it. It's too much. It's too complicated, especially if you like talk to an accountant and they're using the accountant language and you're like, what? It almost becomes intimidating. But I would say don't be so scared of it. That's number four. But also number five is you're gonna know your numbers for sure. Review them, review the reports, know your numbers, and definitely set financial goals. Don't
Right.
just say, oh, it's going to happen. No, it's actually set financial goal. I want this to happen. Once you have a goal set up, as I
Right.
realized, your brain looks for ways to reach that goal. And it should be written down somewhere where you could see it. And I always say, make it so outrageous. It's ridiculous that your mind is going to be like, I'll never achieve it. But then your brain is like, what if?
So what would be your recommendation then, or just talk about it in general then, in terms of setting those goals? Should it be on, I'm assuming we don't want to set just a gross revenue figure because we could say, hey, our revenues are $1 million this year. If your expenses are 1.1 million, that's not good. So how would you recommend, how do we approach goals?
Yeah, so in the beginning, you're always gonna, it's just like how businesses start. You're always gonna spend a little more because you're investing, you're
Mhm.
starting out, especially if it's like from scratch and you're doing everything out of pocket. So your expenses are probably going to exceed your income in the beginning. So that's why if you focus too much on that, then you might get discouraged and not want to start.
Okay.
So I would say for the first 3 years, only focus on the revenue. Like this is the goal I want to do. And then as you get more and more in business, then yes, then you have to be like, okay, forget the revenue. I want to be at 30% profitability, things like that.
Right.
But like I said, in the beginning, it could be very discouraging if you're just focusing on the net profit because you are investing so much.
In terms of upfront startup costs, you mean, or?
Yeah, so if you're purchasing software, if you're spending the money on an office,
Okay.
like starting out, you might not even get a customer for the first 3, 5 months, 6 months. And that could be discouraging if you're just looking at the profitability. So it depends where you are. But in the beginning, set yourself just a revenue goal. When you're starting out, that's more like an investment.
Okay.
Like when I started with taxes, I had to pay a lot of money for a mailing advertisement. This was years ago. And so if I just focused on the profitability, I wasn't profitable the first few years
Okay.
because I had to buy the software, I had to do the mailings, I had to do this. Yes, I'm aware of my expenses, and as you should be, and that's why your goal, you should know your expenses, and that's why your revenue goal should be more than your expenses for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm just talking in general, don't just focus on the profitability,
Okay.
focus on the main goal while the main goal takes into account the expenses.
The company or the venture that you just mentioned, is that the side hustle that you were telling me about earlier?
Yes, so it's a
Okay,
business.
so just for our listeners, I did not know this until we jumped on this call, that the business that Tanya is now operating actually started as a side hustle. So that's a great entry point to that. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would, particularly
Yeah.
people that have just started out and they're facing what you just described with those expenses exceeding revenues.
Yeah, of course. So when I started this out, I did have a full-time job. And so I always knew that not I always, at that time, I always thought it was just going to be a side hustle. It was just going to be tax preparation during tax season, a couple of extra hours a week. But when you're starting, so when I was starting out, I obviously didn't have any customers,
Yes,
just friends and family who wanted me to do their taxes for free.
of course. Yeah. What, you're going to charge me?
Yeah. So in the beginning, but I had literally had expenses. So of course, I had to invest my own personal money that I got from the my W-2 job at the bank. So yes, I didn't make any money the first year or the second year, but as my customer base grew and grew, I started to make more and more money. And for the probably after 2 years or so, because it did spread like wildfire, because I lived in a small town, Delta Junction, Alaska, and I think I was
Wow.
like the only tax preparer there.
Wow. Nice.
So that helped. But I think like my net income or no, my gross income didn't even cross $3,000.
For the
And the
first year.
software, yeah, and the software was like over 1,000.
Right.
So it was a side hustle for a while. I actually decided to go full time in 2017, full time into taxes and accounting and bookkeeping.
And how long was that from the time that you actually started the side hustle?
So that was 2017, and the side hustle I started learning in 2004, and then 2005 for 2004 tax season. That's when I started. So yeah, that's what, 12 years. It was my side
You
hustle.
were doing it as a side hustle. Okay. And what were you doing full time?
Various things at that particular time when I just initially started. I was actually working at a bank as a supervisor. And then I moved to Florida and I was like, what am I going to do? There's no money in tax preparation because it's only just part-time. And so I was like, I'm going to go into being an insurance agent. And then I quickly realized I do not like being an insurance agent. So after my insurance agency, I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to accounting, my true love, and
Aw.
I'm going to do this full time. So yeah, that was back in the end of 2017.
Wait a second. Did I hear you right? You moved from Alaska to Florida?
I did, yeah.
Talk about a temperature change. Oh, girl.
I got enough of the cold. I was like, that's it. I'm moving to the sunny side.
It's pretty funny you mentioned your path there because it mirrors mine a little bit in that my first career was in banking. And for a number of reasons, I decided I wanted to leave banking, but didn't know exactly what I wanted to get into. And I ended up studying to be a life insurance person and went so far as to got a sponsor, like a insurance company, and wrote the exam and passed, and then realized I don't want to do this. And in that moment, actually, what I realized was that I wasn't getting into insurance, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfect career for
Yeah.
some people, but it wasn't a fit for me. But in that moment, I realized that I wasn't going into insurance because I wanted to go into insurance. I was going into insurance because I wanted to leave banking. And I
Mm,
felt that was not a good reason. I want to be running towards something I want, going towards it, not running away from something.
yeah.
So I thought, okay, I need to do some reevaluation here. I guess it gets back down to, and a lot of us talk about that, is the why behind what we're doing. And it sounds like
Yeah.
you're a number cruncher at heart.
I am. I love the accounting puzzle.
You mentioned to me earlier that everyone thinks their financial decisions are logical. They look at the numbers,
Mhm.
they do the math, but you suggest that in reality, those decisions are emotional. Can you elaborate on that a bit? Because I know I would consider myself in the category of being logical and crunching the numbers, which I do. But I also know there are times that when I want to do something or make a purchase, I will look for ways to justify it.
That is so true. Yes, as much as we want to be logical, because honestly, everyone wants to be logical, the numbers make sense. We are definitely emotional decision makers when it comes to finances. And I believe it's all because of how we brought up. Some people are okay with debt. Other people, it's the scariest thing for them. I don't want to owe anybody
Mm,
money. And other people are okay to like rent. And other people are like, no, my goal is to buy a house. That's it. So it's very like, and everybody's different. There is no business that's a thing that are exactly alike. Every business is like a different fingerprint. And that's because the decision makers have their own way of deciding things. And it's not logical.
okay.
And the whole justification, yes, a lot of times you make the decision and then you're trying to justify it. I've been there too.
So how should we be making our decisions then?
I would say you have to know how you make your decisions. You have to know
Okay.
yourself. And you have to realize a lot of times it's more of a reflection on yourself. Like, why am I so against this debt? You know, or why am I okay with owing so much money? Do I really want to owe money or should I be getting out of debt? Things like that. As soon as you realize what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, then you have that baseline because it's not the same for everyone.
All right.
And then once you know how you make your decisions, and it's also in time, like time of day, time of week, when do you make your best decisions? Don't make a financial decision when your kid is screaming in the back seat and like arguing.
Right. What state
Or
are
it's
you in? Yeah.
yeah, what's your mental state as well? Because sometimes we'll just like, I'm just so overwhelmed with this. And finances can be very overwhelming. And sometimes you're like, I'm just so overwhelmed. I just need to make this decision. And
Hmm.
then that's why there's like buyer's remorse and things like that.
Yes. When it comes to business, though, I typically look at, is this purchase that I'm going to be making, is it going to contribute to generating revenue? For example, a guest that I had in mind, Melissa Mills. She's done a phenomenal job starting a company with $500, a blender, and a bicycle. She couldn't afford a car, and has grown it into the millions. They're expanding internationally. It's a fabulous success story. But at any rate, at one point, she's working at it's like a group kitchen where
Okay.
people that are selling products commercially, they can come in and rent kitchen space. And I asked her, I said, the ones that disappear that you don't see anymore, what mistakes are they making? And she said, oftentimes it's the spending. Like the person next to her bought this big expensive vehicle that they did not need for their
Yeah.
deliveries. I think a little bit of that is the emotional purchase that you were talking about. And she
Yeah.
says, I can't afford to do that yet. That's not a good idea. So take a look what matters and keep those expenses in check until
For
the
sure.
revenue starts coming in. What are the biggest bookkeeping mistakes someone running a side hustle makes?
Honestly, miscategorization. Like a lot of times they might purchase something and it's really an asset and should go on the balance sheet because it's a value of your business that you can sell with, but they're saying that it's an expense. So miscategorization, especially if you have a product.
Before you leave that one, can you give us a specific example of that?
Right now, I can only think of construction.
Okay, sure.
So, like a contractor, he goes out and buys a bunch of tools, and that's the value, the whole thing. So, in one day, he purchases like $5,000 worth of tools, which is not uncommon for a subcontractor because you got to have the drill, you got to have, all these things, and those tools are expensive. So, because you purchased it all at once and together, that's your asset, that's your business value. You can technically sell it, right? However, if you're going there and just buying I've seen business owners buying a couple of hammers, just $100 worth, and it's an asset in their asset. And I'm like, that's an expense already because you didn't buy it together. So in the US, we have the $500 limit. If it's anything over 500, it's considered an asset. Anything under, it's considered an expense.
And in Canada, I think it's pretty similar. But I think the point that you're getting at, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you're saying that $5,000 is an asset, then when it comes to doing the books, you're just depreciating it. The expense on that, is it just a small percentage every year?
That
Whereas,
is correct. Yeah.
all right,
But that's also the value of your business.
so for example, that 5,000, what would the tools depreciate? What percentage?
Probably 20% if you do
Oh,
it
that
over.
high? Okay.
Yeah, if you do it over.
So that first year, you're going to have a deduction for $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
But some people miscategorize that. They'll put it as expense. Now they're writing off the full 5,000.
Yeah.
So as you can see, the tax consequence is the difference. But then at the same time, as you pointed out, that does not become part of the value of the business. So that's the other error, right?
Yeah. But also like little expenses as well. So like a gas receipt, I could see it in travel, or a meals receipt, I could see it in office expense. So just being consistent and categorizing it correctly.
And the benefit there being so that we really know the value of that expense.
Correct. Yeah. If you're putting all your meals in an office expense, your office expense is going to look bigger than it
Right.
actually is.
Got it. Okay. Anything else you want to add to that category of bookkeeping mistakes?
Honestly, just not realizing something is a business expense. There's a lot of times people, especially starting out, they would go to networking events and there's like a cover charge.
Okay.
And you're thinking, I'm just going there because I cover charge, but it gives me a free drink or whatever. But that networking cover charge is a business expense. That's your marketing expense. And so if you're not like tracking those expenses that you're not realizing are expenses, then you don't have the correct financial information.
Right. And you could be paying more taxes than you should be, or not having as great a loss to offset from your full-time revenue.
Yeah,
You can do that in the US, right? If your side hustle is showing a
correct.
loss, you can
Yes.
apply that to
Hmm.
your income from your full-time. Got it. And of course, tax laws do vary country to country, but can you give us some guidance as to the best way to pay yourself from your side hustle income?
Yeah, so in US, it's gonna vastly depend on how you're set up, how your business is set up. So you might have to pay yourself through payroll, which is like almost like having a real job through a W-2. Yes, a side hustle can be like a corporation. Or you might be, I don't know if you guys have it, but like a limited liability company or even sole proprietor. Then in those situations, you wouldn't pay yourself payroll. You would just take money out of the company as needed because you and the company on taxes are considered one. But
Right.
I can give you a quick cheat sheet, and I think just the general mindset of business expenses and things like that, even though this is specifically for the US, but generally this could help in bookkeeping as well. For our business tax deduction cheat sheet, it helps you think about expenses and what's an expense and what could not be an expense. And I
Okay.
can give you the link for that. It's on our website.
That's great. Definitely put that in the show notes. And when you mentioned that, this also popped into mind. I just wanted to share. I had a business once with two partners, and when the revenue was coming in, there was some months there that we were short cash flow, and they wanted to use the money that our customers paid us in taxes. And I said no, because that money is not ours. We're just collecting it. I'm talking like a state tax, a provincial tax. We have here a GST. In the UK, it's the VAT. That money you're passing along to somebody else. So if you keep that segregated, it's out of sight, out of mind, and you're not tempted to spend it. Because when you have to fill out that form and send in that money, if you haven't set it aside, all of a sudden you might be in a cash crunch. Would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that. We have sales tax here. And yes, you're just collecting, you're just the middleman, and you have to pass that to the state. And if you don't, you have tremendous consequences
Mhm.
with that, with penalties and things like that. So I agree with you, having separate account, out of sight, out of mind is the easiest way.
Yeah. As soon as it comes in, it gets split between those two accounts, your general account and then the tax account. Okay. In my Winning the Money Game seminar, I have audience members place themselves in one of four categories when it comes to money management. And one of those categories is the avoider, the person who gets the bank statement and they toss it to the side or they skip over the email notification. They're thinking, I've checked my balance. There's money there, so it's all good. Everything must be fine. What's your advice for the avoider who has left it so long? Now they're overwhelmed. Where should they even start?
That's funny because I have a saying that for my customers, it's the bank balance accounting.
Oh,
They
yes.
check their bank balance.
That's right. Oh, there's money there. I'm good.
Yeah,
Except when that tax bill's due tomorrow. Yeah.
that's true. Yeah. I would say start where you are because going backwards, or starting from the beginning, it is so overwhelming. So start where you are, start tracking today, and then slowly work yourself backwards to collect that information.
Okay.
But get current. Start with today, start where you are. Because yes, if you start and then you have this huge pile, a huge mountain to crawl, versus today, oh, it's just today's accounting, today's transaction. That's just one step. But slowly as you step, then the mountain becomes easier. And then so go current and then the work backwards.
That'll give the person a chance to get skilled at it as well and develop those
Yeah.
habit patterns and the flow so that then they can slowly take a look at that backlog and deal with it. Good tip. When you mentioned about the importance of habit, made me think to that same money course that I teach, and I have people set money aside into what I call their financial freedom fund. When they're doing it on a daily basis, it's actually in a physical jar, but I call it your financial freedom fund. And eventually, as you save up that money, it goes to buying passive income businesses or passive income investments. And a key message there is to do it, to put something in there daily. It's not the amount that counts. Like I say, put in $1, 50 cents, I don't care. Just do something a little bit every day because you're forming the habit. And so you're doing that now. Maybe you don't have a lot of cash flow, a lot of money, but what you're doing is forming a new habit. And over time, as your side hustle becomes more and more successful, you have these systems in place like we're talking about today, so that as more money comes in, you know how to handle it.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. When I have a new customer comes in, I always say, when you get money in, put aside 10%. Or even if you can't do 10%, put aside 5%. For first, you have to start with the emergency fund. But if you build that habit right away, because if it's out of sight, out of mind, and I always say, get a separate bank account. Don't get a debit card from that bank account.
No, definitely not. No debit card for that account. Yeah.
Yeah, just transfer some, build a habit, and then utilize the funds that are there because I always like this quote, if you give yourself a week to clean your house, it's going to take you a week. If you give yourself 1 hour, it will take you 1 hour.
Oh, I can so relate to that. They're coming in an hour. Okay. Right?
Yeah, so same with finances. If you give yourself this amount, you're going to find things to spend on. But then if you give yourself this amount, then, hey, I need to make sure I fit
Yeah.
into this.
Yeah. And you and I both grew up in the banking system. That was our initial work. And so I'm sure you obviously heard about the 10% for in your earlier years, me too. But I always found that incredibly boring to think that I would be saving up 10% for my retirement, which most people perceive to be in their 60s and in their 70s, which is completely uninspiring when you're in your late teens and 20s.
That's true.
It's like you've got a lifetime to live. Why bother now? But then what I learned is that 10% isn't for that retirement way down the road. That 10% is for you to build up in order to win the money game. And for
Yeah.
me, that's when your passive income exceeds your expenses. And so the sooner you do that in life, the sooner you've won the money game. And now, like you and I, we're working because we want to, not because we have to. And so that's the idea behind putting that 10% away, is to build up that portfolio of passive income investments in businesses so that you can win the money game. And it doesn't have to be 65. It could be 35, 45, whatever those goals and aspirations are for yourself.
That's true.
What's the best way for our listeners to connect with you, Tanya?
Yeah, they could find me on my website, goldenappleagencyinc.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn, with my name, Tanya Akimenko. And of course, I do have social media for Golden Apple Agency, Instagram and Facebook.
Fabulous. And we'll make sure all those links are in the show notes as well. So that's the business that you started as a side hustle all those years ago. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I had to change the name because it started with Tanya's tax preparation service. It's hard to have Tanya's tax preparation service with 15 employees.
Right. That was a side hustle tip actually from one of our guests years and years ago. He says, pay attention to when you're naming your side hustle because you never know what it'll grow into. And you want to be able to make it ideally saleable. So you can't, you haven't pinned the company name onto your own name. That's great.
Yeah, very true.
So what's your best tip to inspire others to start or grow their side hustle dream?
If you're just thinking about it, I would say just do it. Just start. I wish I would have started sooner. Even going full time, even when I started the side hustle to going into it full time, I just wish I started sooner. And time is one of those things, once it's gone, once it passes. And it's so hard because you do have a life. You probably have a job. You might have kids and you're like, I'm thinking about this side hustle. I want to do it. I might not have time, but I just want to encourage everyone to just do it. Just start. You never know what it could grow into. Could be your full-time job.
There you go. I love that. Thank you so much, Tanya, for your insights on bookkeeping and the pro tips that you shared. And of course, for being today's side hustle hero.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
So to quickly recap, here are Tanya's 5 pro bookkeeping tips to keep your business on track. Number 1, set up a system from day one. Decide where and how you'll store receipts and financial records, digital folders, cloud storage, or physical files. Number 2, simplify everything. The more complex your system, the less likely you are to put it to use. Find a method that works for you, whether it's spreadsheet software or an email folder for receipts with that dedicated email address. Number 3, build the habit. Schedule your bookkeeping time, even if you start with just a few minutes. If you're consistently showing up, it'll make it easier over time. And number 4, don't fear the numbers. Many people avoid bookkeeping because it feels overwhelming. Start where you are. Don't let a backlog discourage you. When starting to use new accounting software, go through their training to ensure that you're inputting the data correctly. And lastly, number 5, avoid costly misclassifications. For example, know the difference between an expense and an asset. Misclassifying purchases can cause big issues come tax time, as well as if you decided to sell your business in the future. While bookkeeping work might not be the most exciting aspect of your side hustle, it needs to get done. I hope today's episode has helped. Well, that's a wrap for today. In the episode description, you'll find a link to Tanya's website and socials, as well as the full show notes, which live at our website, sidehustlehero.com. If you're enjoying what you're seeing in this podcast, it would be so appreciated if you would take a moment and add your comment, share the episode, and please subscribe. It'll let others know that there's valuable content here to help them start or grow their side hustle. Thanks for watching, and hustle on.